What I will attempt to do here in this short talk is to present an overview of the reception of Gnosticism in the turn of the 20th century Europe. And I will focus on Gnosticism as perspectives of Gnosticism and what we can say about it, which have inspired religious practice and perhaps even social change. If I was to include the way Gnosticism inspired literature, art, and philosophy more broadly, it would have been a much longer talk. So I will have to restrict myself to practice rather than symbol and metaphor. But in my mind, at least, I think this is the more interesting side of the reception of Gnosticism in this time. Most of the ideas and notions associated with Gnosticism are due to the writings of the early Christian church fathers. The church fathers produced heresiological texts meant to promote their value of Christian doctrine and practice. In doing so, some of them, like Irenaeus of Lyon, here showcased, and Epiphanius of Salamis, employ the term Gnostic pejoratively to denote certain kinds of Christian heresies. There is no single common denominator tying these many groups and individuals together who were labeled with this term Gnostic. The church fathers never endeavored to use the category Gnostic systematically. It would have defeated the point, which was, of course, to show how diverse and disparate their theological opponents were. The first time we encounter the term Gnosticism is in the work of the Cambridge Platonist and theologian Henry More. This is, one can say, the first time the many different groups and ideas associated with the ancient Gnostics were tied together and under the same ism, so to say. So already from the beginning here, it is somewhat unclear what the term actually means, more than heresy. But one could say that Gnosticism in general referred to ancient versions of Christianity that did not shy away from allegorical readings of Genesis. Gnostics viewed the cosmos as designed by a powerful but lower-standing creator God, not the true God. The human spirit was an eternal substance that longed to be reunited with the divine origin from whence it had come. If one was interested in Gnosticism during this time of Henry More, one had to rely on the church fathers for information. There was not much first-hand sources available at this time. At the end of the 18th century, there was an improvement when two manuscript discoveries were made. The first of these was the Bruce Codex, named after the Scottish traveller James Bruce, who purchased a manuscript containing two Coptic texts in the year 1769. The two texts were very technical and did not receive much attention. And in a few years after, another discovery was made when an English doctor, showcased here on the right, Anthony Askew, discovered, or came into the possession, rather, of another Coptic codex containing the work called Pistis Sophia. It took almost 100 years for this text, Pistis Sophia, to be translated into a modern language, but when it finally did, it seems to have been read quite broadly. During this time, theologians and other scholars treated Gnosticism as having little value in and of itself. But nevertheless, they studied it for reasons for what it could tell about other phenomena. So not for Gnosticism in particular, but for other phenomena like Christianity, Judaism, or Platonism. So Gnosticism was always defined as something other, something less. But there was another context in which information about Gnosticism was valued more. This was the emerging occult and esoteric milieu. So a fitting place to begin the following very short survey of the influence of Gnosticism in 20th century occult Europe would be to look shortly on French Catholicism. In France, even before the Revolution years, there were resistance towards Rome. The monarchy was not subjected to the Pope. The French countryside had also long witnessed the influence of so-called wandering bishops and priests who had been consecrated in ambiguous ways and who had lost touch or been cast out from the Catholic Church. This raw Catholicism was galvanized in the aftermath of the Revolution, which brought with it more religious freedom and disconnection from Rome as well as the crown. The life and work of Eugène Vintras could be seen as embodying these trends in France. Vintras was a self-proclaimed bishop who founded his own church in Normandy with the aim to bring back gnosis to the people. He allowed women to be priests and started to consecrate new bishops, who in turn established new churches in other areas of France. On his death in 1875, a man named Joseph Anton Boulin declared himself as Vintras' successor. Boulin was a defrocked Catholic priest with strong leanings toward the occult, and would develop Vintras' teachings to focus more on sexual symbolism, ideas that are said to have influenced the work of the occult writer Husman. During this time, Jules Donnel established the Église Gnostique, the first church in the modern era to take the name of the ancient Gnostics. Donnel, who in his youth aspired to become an ordained Jesuit, left the seminary and became involved in Freemasonry and Martinism. He was expelled from his lodge in 1895, and after having a series of revelations during a seance, he started a new church in order to restore Gnosticism to the world. He renamed himself Tau Valentin II after the famous 2nd century Gnostic teacher Valentinus, and developed his teachings and practices based on Valentinian theology, introducing, for example, the practice of marrying people with their angelic counterparts. Like Vintras, he also allowed women to become leaders in his newly established church, principles that were thought to have been standard among the ancient Gnostics. Several famous occult personalities were part of Donnel's church. One of these was the intellectual and esoteric writer René Guénon. He started the influential journal La Gnose, a journal devoted to the search for gnosis, defined broadly as spiritual knowledge. Each number of the journal began with a list of suggested readings for those who are interested in spiritual knowledge, and the Gnostic text Pistis Sophia was always among these recommended readings. Guénon himself would later turn to the esoteric versions of Islam. So we have another interesting character who also was a bishop in the Gnostic church, Gérard Encausse, or better known as Papy. Papy was a Freemason and one of the founders of the reawakened Martinist order. He had been consecrated a bishop of Toulouse in the Église Gnostique. However, Papus left the church and became more involved with Martinism, but he continued to view Gnosticism as one of the final stages of a spiritual evolution. Papus collaborated with Jean Bricot, bishop of the Église Gnostique in Lyon and author of the Gnostic Church's Catechism. Together with Papus, Bricot made contact with German representatives of the occult initiatory society Ordo Templi Orientis. For example, these two characters, Theodor Reuss and Karl Keller. These two, in turn, start their own branches of Gnostic churches in Germany, Gnostic Katholische Kirche. And Aleister Crowley, who was to become the head of the British OTO, later named his particular branch of ecclesiastical occultism based on his religion telema, the Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica. These groups and individuals seem to have been in particular interested in the association between Gnosticism and sexual mysticism, in a way to reach gnosis by exploring the body and bodily fluids. Another context in which Gnosticism was influential was within the Theosophical Society. Here, Gnosticism was viewed in general as a great resource for ancient esoteric knowledge. Madame Blavatsky refers to the Pistis Sophia several times in her work, The Secret Doctrine. But her interest and knowledge of Gnosticism comes in the shadow of this man, G.R.S. Mead. He was a prolific writer, also Madame Blavatsky's secretary at a point, amateur scholar, a translator of anything that was associated with ancient wisdom religion. It was Mead who produced the first ever English translation of the Coptic text Pistis Sophia, which is still still in print today. Mead published widely on the nature of Gnosticism in theosophical journals and viewed it as an esoteric version of Christianity that corresponded to the Theosophy in modern times. It was much thanks to Mead's work, which led to the growing interest in Gnosticism around the 19th century. For example, James Price was an American theosophist and publisher, started an organization called the Gnostic Society in Los Angeles together with his brother, an organization which later merged with what is today known as Ecclesia Gnostica, a Gnostic church run by the Jungian Stephen Höller. When Mead left the Theosophical Society in 1909, he in no way abandoned his interest for Gnosticism, but he would found a group called The Quest. The purpose of this group was, as they themselves stated it, to help those who are seeking for an understanding of the purpose of life and the meaning of self-realization. The Quest published this journal here by the same name, which was devoted to the study of comparative religion and the roots of ancient wisdom traditions. The journal published widely on Gnosticism, but also on Kabbalah, antique religiosity in general, and Indian religions. Many intellectuals contributed to this journal, for example, William Butler Yeats, Rudolf Bultmann, Gershom Scholem, and many others. So, in what way did Gnosticism influence this cultural milieu during the turn of the 20th century? Well, among the groups and individuals I have mentioned here, one could say that the chief way that Gnosticism inspires is as a symbol of resistance and rebellion. Gnosticism was seen as an ancient wisdom tradition which called for people to challenge the power structures in places where to challenge the power structures in place in the mainstream Christian society. Blavatsky, for example, as well as her predecessor, Annie Besant, viewed Eve's rebellion in the Garden of Eden as exemplary. Donnell, as I mentioned, was guided by the divine female spirit, the divine Sophia wisdom, and consecrated women into his fold, which was unthinkable in any Christian denomination at the time. Boulan taught and performed marriages between his congregants and divine angelic beings and was drawn to sexual magic, questioning the sexual morals of the time, which also took part in the German esotericism, not to mention in Aristotle's work. This side of Gnosticism is the result of the Church Fathers' polemical depictions of Gnostics, their beliefs and practice. Female leadership and sexual libertinism are not to be found in the Gnostic first-hand sources. In fact, the only Gnostic source, which was widely read during this time, the Pistis Sophia, states plainly that those who engage in the sexual behavior which the Church Fathers attached to Gnostics should be condemned. So the reception of Gnosticism during this era represents something very interesting. Namely, the way that stories of the religious other, stories constructed and sustained by a religious mainstream, are appropriated and utilized in later times by people in minority positions or people who identify as belonging to a societal fringe. The stories about Gnostic resistance were so important that one chose to ignore evidence which could challenge it. It is an ironic twist of fate that the Church Fathers' inventions regarding the deviant nature of Gnostics actually inspired real action. The different Gnostic churches popping up around Europe in late 19th century must be considered as pioneers in promoting female leadership in religious settings and perhaps also sexual morals. This deserves, I think, further study. So me and my colleague Johan Nilsson in Lund are developing a project on the way that Christian histories were reclaimed and reread within the fringes of society and used to inspire social change at the turn of the 20th century. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for this interesting history. My question is, where does Gnosticism stand today, and does it in some way relate to our two key words, modernity and meaning?
That's a very good question. I should perhaps open my lecture by saying that my main field of research is actually ancient Gnosticism, and this is a kind of way to expand my interests and research capabilities. Well, how Gnosticism stands today, it's, I mentioned one organization which is still active, perhaps perhaps not flourishing that much, but it's still around in Los Angeles, the Ecclesia Gnostica. And how it relates to modernity, that is something I would have to think about.
But I mean, when you read the newspapers about what's happening in the world, you say, I can see traces, influence, thinking like Gnosticism.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have been interested in my research is the way Gnosticism is used as this idea of the religious other. So when you find Gnosticism mentioned as a category in, for example, cultural debate, it's almost always, I would say, a negative thing. So, for example, the hatred of the world, the despising the body, and such. So in that way, it's a kind of anti-image. So you could fill it with pretty much anything you want, but it's always a negative something.
Does this apply to Theosophy as well?
How it applies to
Theosophy.
the concept, how Theosophy.
Yeah.
That's I'm not an expert on Theosophy at all, so I would not want to say anything about that when people like Parfaxnell is sitting there.
I like when people are not experts on everything, so thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.